Imagine this. You wake up every single morning and you have no idea where you are going to sleep that night. No house, no bed, no address, no landlord, no rent, just you, your family, and everything you own on your back. That was the life of every single human being on this planet for 95% of our existence. And then, about 12,000 years ago, something changed. Humans stopped moving. They picked a spot. They built walls. They planted seeds. They stayed. And that one decision, to stop, created everything. Cities, laws, writing, money, war, religion, art, science, you. But here is the question nobody asks. Why did they stop? What made a species that had successfully survived for hundreds of thousands of years as nomads suddenly decide that staying in one place was a better idea? The answer is not what you think, and it involves a drought, a handful of wild wheat, a cemetery, and a mystery that archaeologists are still arguing about today. Let's start with who these people actually were. For roughly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived as hunter-gatherers, small groups, 20 to 50 people, always moving, following herds of animals, following fruit seasons, following water. And here is the thing, they were not miserable. Modern studies of the few remaining hunter-gatherer societies today show that they typically work about 4 to 6 hours a day to meet all their food needs. The rest of the time, socializing, sleeping, making art. One anthropologist famously called them the original affluent society. They were healthy, they were well-fed, they had variety in their diet, and they had freedom that no human alive today can fully imagine. So why on earth would you give that up? The old answer, the one they taught in schools for 100 years, was simple. Someone discovered farming. Farming produced more food. More food meant more people. More people built cities. Cities created civilization. Progress. Simple, clean, linear. There is just one problem. It is almost certainly wrong, because when archaeologists actually dug up the bones of the first farmers, the very first humans who switched from hunting and gathering to growing crops, what they found was shocking. The early farmers were shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They had more bone disease, more tooth decay, more signs of malnutrition, more signs of infectious disease from living in close quarters with animals and other humans. In other words, the first farmers were less healthy than the people who came before them. So if farming made life worse, why did anyone do it? This is where it gets really interesting. The leading theory today is that farming was not invented because people wanted to farm. It was invented because people had no choice. Here is what happened. Around 12,000 years ago, the world was coming out of an ice age. Temperatures were warming, glaciers were melting. It should have been a great time to be alive, and for a while, it was. A period called the Younger Dryas changed everything. About 12,900 years ago, right in the middle of this warming period, something triggered a sudden, dramatic cold snap. The temperatures in parts of the world dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius within just a few decades. Rivers dried up, forests shrank. The herds of large animals that humans had been hunting started disappearing, either from the climate change or from being hunted to extinction by increasingly skilled human hunters. Food got scarce, fast, and when food gets scarce, desperate people do desperate things. They started paying much closer attention to plants, specifically to seeds. In the region archaeologists call the Fertile Crescent, the area covering modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and southeastern Turkey, ancient humans had been casually harvesting wild grains for thousands of years. Einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, wild barley. They would walk through fields of these wild grasses, knock the seeds into baskets, and carry them back to camp. But now, with large game disappearing and the climate becoming unpredictable, they started doing something new. They started staying near the fields, not farming yet, just staying close to the food source. And here is where the accidental genius happened. When you harvest wild grain and carry it back to camp, some seeds fall on the ground near where you sleep. Some land near the ash of your fire, which is rich in nutrients. Some get left in piles and take root. And the next season, without anyone planning it, there are plants growing right where you are. And those plants, the ones that survived being dropped and walked on and partially buried, they were the toughest ones, the ones with the strongest stems, the biggest seeds. Humans noticed, and they started doing it on purpose. But here is the real twist. Most archaeologists now believe that farming was not the reason humans settled down. It was the other way around. Humans settled down first, and farming came later. The evidence for this comes from one of the most remarkable archaeological sites ever discovered, Göbekli Tepe. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd in southeastern Turkey was walking through his fields when he tripped over a strange stone sticking out of the ground. He called the archaeologists. They started digging. What they found changed everything we thought we knew about early human civilization. Göbekli Tepe is a temple complex, a series of massive circular stone enclosures built with T-shaped limestone pillars up to 6 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons each, carved with incredibly detailed reliefs of animals, foxes, snakes, wild boars, cranes, lions. It is breathtaking, and it is 11,500 years old. That is older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, older than the pyramids by 7,000 years. But here is what makes it truly extraordinary. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers, not farmers, not city dwellers. People who had no permanent settlement, no domesticated animals, no agriculture. These nomadic people somehow organized themselves to quarry massive limestone blocks from a nearby cliff, transport them to this hilltop, and build a complex of temples that required years of sustained, coordinated, large-scale labor. How? Why? The lead archaeologist on the site, Klaus Schmidt, spent years studying this question before his death in 2014. His answer was bold. He believed that Göbekli Tepe was not built because people were already settled. He believed it was the reason they settled. The temple came first, and feeding the people who built and maintained the temple, hundreds of workers over many years, required a stable food supply, which required farming. In other words, religion created agriculture, not the other way around. The need to maintain a sacred place, a place of ritual, of burial, of gathering, forced people to figure out how to stay in one place and feed themselves. It is one of the most mind-bending reversals in the history of archaeology, and it is still being debated today. There is another piece of this puzzle that most people miss entirely: the dead. Think about it from a human perspective. You are a nomad. You have been walking your whole life. Your grandmother dies. You bury her under a tree somewhere in the forest, and then you leave, because that is what nomads do. But what if your group started building permanent burial sites? What if you started marking the graves of your ancestors with stones? What if you started performing rituals at those graves, returning to them year after year? You would have a reason to come back to the same place, and coming back to the same place again and again. is the beginning of settling down. At Rakafet Cave in Israel, the same cave where that 13,000-year-old beer was found, archaeologists discovered evidence of exactly this. The Natufian people were burying their dead in the same locations over many generations. They were decorating graves with flowers. They were returning to those sites. The dead were anchoring the living. So by now, you might be thinking, okay, so people settled down near sacred sites, near burial grounds, near wild grain fields. They started farming by accident, then on purpose. Fine. But why did it spread? Why did the whole world eventually give up nomadic life? 2 words: population pressure. Once farming starts, even inefficient, exhausting, disease-ridden early farming, it produces one thing that hunting and gathering cannot match at scale: caloric density per square kilometer. A group of farmers can feed 10 to 100 times more people from the same piece of land as a group of hunter-gatherers. More food means more babies survive. More babies means more people. More people means you need more food. More food means you need to farm more land. And the farmers kept expanding, outward from the Fertile Crescent, into Europe, into Africa, across Asia. Wherever farmers went, they brought their crops, their animals, their diseases, and their population numbers. The hunter-gatherers they encountered didn't stand a chance. Not because of war necessarily, but because of simple demographics. You cannot compete long-term with a population that doubles every few generations while yours stays stable. The farmers didn't conquer the nomads. They simply outnumbered them. And here is the final twist. The people who switched to farming, the first generation, the second, the third, they almost certainly knew it was harder. They could see that the old way of life was healthier, more free, less work, but they were trapped. Once your population grows beyond what hunting and gathering can support, you cannot go back. There are too many mouths to feed. The land cannot support your numbers without agriculture. It was a trap that closed slowly over hundreds of generations until there was no way out. We have been in that trap ever since. Every city, every skyscraper, every supermarket, every office, every traffic jam, all of it traces back to one desperate group of humans, 12,000 years ago, staying a little too close to a field of wild wheat because the animals were gone and they were hungry. So when did ancient humans stop being nomads? Not all at once. Not in a single moment of genius. Not because someone had a great idea, but slowly, painfully, reluctantly, pulled by the sacred, pushed by hunger, trapped by their own numbers. And the world we live in today, with all its beauty and all its problems, is the direct result of that trapped decision. If this made you think differently about where you come from, subscribe, because the next video covers the civilization that came after the first farmers, the people who built the first cities, wrote the first laws, and created something no human had ever seen before, the Sumerians. And their story is even stranger